Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good morning, Synod. A notice before we start. If you were on Zoom yesterday and you are now present in the chamber today, can you let the information desk know so that you can be changed over from the Lumi platform to voting cards? So if you were on Zoom yesterday and you're here today, please inform the information desk. Thank you. We come now to item 502, and you will see that on order paper 2, The Synod will now take the final drafting stages for the draft Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions, Measure and Draft Amending Canon number 43. Members will need the draft measure, GS 2272B, the draft canon, GS 2273B, and the report of the steering committee, GS 2272Z and 2273Z, which relates to both the draft measure and the draft canon. I now call on the chair of the steering committee, Mr. Stephen Hoffmeyer, KC, to move item 502, that the Synod do take note of this report. You have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen Hoffmeyer, Guildford 320. Good morning, Synod. Every few years, a miscellaneous provisions measure is introduced. These measures deal with matters that do not merit separate freestanding legislation, but they nevertheless contain important provisions. Whilst legislative business can be tedious and even boring, legislation makes a real, sometimes profound difference. So let me thank you for your attention to the detail. You will recall that we began this process exactly a year ago when we gave first consideration to the measure and amending Canon 43. The second stage was done by the revision committee. This took place in November and December last year. 19 submissions were received, and the revision committee made several amendments and additions. The third stage, the formal revision stage, took place in the February sessions. Together, we looked at each clause of the draft measure and each paragraph of the draft amending canon. During the revision stage, one provision was withdrawn, others were amended in accordance with proposals made by members of Synod, and other proposed amendments were rejected by General Synod. This was when we did the heavy lifting, as it were. The measure and amending canon then went back to the steering committee for consideration in respect of their final drafting. This has now taken place, and my first task this morning under this item is to invite you to take note of that succinct report of the steering committee. The debate which will follow will be a take-note debate only. If you want to address the content of the measure or the canon, your turn will come in a moment, so please hold your horses. This is a take-note debate only. However, before I invite you to take note of the report, may I remind you that there are two, but only two types of amendment the steering committee is authorized to make at this stage. First, there are drafting amendments. Those amendments to clarify uncertainties of meaning or to improve the drafting. Second, there are special amendments. Those are amendments which do not reopen an issue which has been decided by you, but which go further than mere drafting and are considered necessary or desirable by the Standing Committee to be made. Now, the Steering Committee made various drafting amendments, and these are shown in bold type on the draft measure and canon. They speak for themselves, but for your convenience are described at Annex A to the report of the Steering Committee. There was one amendment which the Steering Committee considered was more than just a drafting amendment. It concerns Clause 8 of the draft measure, which inserts a new Section 25A in the Patronage Benefices Measure 1986. The purpose of this insertion was to prevent a patron from exercising rights of patronage if the individual had been convicted of certain offences, criminal offences, or was included on a barred list under the Safeguarding of Vulnerable Adults Act 2006. Now, the intention was to impose a safeguarding protection. Unfortunately, and it is a mistake for which I must take full responsibility, the clause as originally drafted went much wider than was intended. It referred to the whole of the part of the Church Representation Rules, Part 7, when it should have referred to one rule within the part, namely Rule 68. Part 10 contains 10 rules, and a reference to Part 7 would have had unintended consequences of disqualifying all sorts of worthy people from exercising rights of patronage. This was never intended. What was intended was to exclude those individuals disqualified by Rule 68 on safeguarding grounds. And I will ask you to give consideration to the special amendment under the next item. But first, I'm asking you to take note, and for this purpose, let me remind you very quickly of the 4 drafting amendments. The first set of drafting amendments are a consequence of General Synod in February having approved Amending Canon 42. You will recall that Amending Canon 42 amends the canonical requirements on safeguarding, requiring the bishop of each diocese to appoint diocesan safeguarding officer rather than an advisor. And there are a number of references to DSAs in other measures, and these all need to be updated to DSOs. So they're purely consequential amendments. There are also 3 drafting amendments to the canon. The first makes the way Queen Camilla is referred to consistent with royal warrant. The second merely inserts the date on which the Marriage and Civil Partnerships Minimum Age Act 2022 commenced. The third substitutes canonical references to DSA with references to DSOs. Under the standing orders, drafting amendments are deemed to have been made without being moved. Special amendments must be moved, and I will do that in the next section in relation to the one special amendment the Steering Committee is proposing. But before we come to the special amendment, may I invite you to take note of the Steering Committee's report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. As we go to debate, I would ask members not to raise matters in the debate on the final report that concern the special amendment, but to wait until the amendment is moved after the take-note debate has concluded. And please do not address the content of the measure or the canon themselves at need a show of hands. And those of you on Zoom, a green tick will be in order. So can I now see a show of hands of those who would like to take note? Those in favor? Sorry, those in favor, please show your hands. Thank you. Those against? Clearly carried. The steering committee proposes one special amendment to the draft measure. It is set out in the order paper 2 at item 512. I call on Mr. Hofmeyr to move item 512. You have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen Hofmeyr, Guildford 320. As I mentioned, well, may I first thank members of Synod for taking note of the steering committee's report. As I mentioned in my introduction, the steering committee proposes one special amendment to the draft measure, and as I explained why the amendment was necessary, to substitute Rule 68 for Part 7, and the purpose of the amendment, as I said, was to disqualify patrons on safeguarding grounds and not to disqualify others who were not intended to be disqualified. Whilst we were advised that it is arguable that the amendment is merely a drafting amendment, the steering committee chose to take a cautious approach in the interests of transparency and to bring the matter specifically to the attention of General Synod and to give General Synod an opportunity to test the proposed amendment. The steering committee hope that you would have appreciated the obvious need for the proposed amendment, and I would now invite General Synod specifically to approve the special amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. This item is now open for debate. I see no one standing, so we will go straight to the vote. If you're on Zoom, a green tick if you're voting in favor. If you're voting against, a red cross. Those in favor, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. Thank you. That is clearly carried. We now move to item 503. The Synod has reached the final approval stage for the draft measure. Members will need GS 2272B. I call on Mr. Stephen Hofmeyr to move item 503, that the measure entitled Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions measure be finally approved. Mr. Hofmeyr, you may speak for up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen Hofmeyr, Guildford 320. It now gives me great pleasure to invite General Synod finally to approve both the measure and Amending Canon 43. Apart from the drafting and special amendments which we have now dealt with, there will not be and may not be any further amendments according to standing orders. General Synod has already given its support at the revision stage to the drafts before you, and we are now at the final approval stage, and in a moment I'll be inviting you to give the legislation final approval. We will be taking the measure first, and when we have voted on the measure, we will move to the amending canon. As I said in the introduction, the measure contains a potpourri of pieces of legislation, none of which merit their own freestanding measure, but each of which is important. The draft measure has 22 clauses, all of which you are familiar with, having debated them clause by clause at the February group of sessions. But reminding you of those, clause 1, during COVID, we passed a measure to enable General Synod to hold remote and hybrid meetings on a temporary basis. Having gained confidence in the use of remote and hybrid meetings, clause 1 makes the change permanent. It also removes the prohibition on Article 7 and Article 8 business being considered at a remote or hybrid meeting of Synod. In February, there was a lively debate on that subject. Some members expressed their strong opposition to the removal of the prohibition, but the mood of General Synod was very clearly that remote and hybrid meetings are here to stay, and that all members of General Synod should be given the opportunity to participate in all of the business of General Synod. And there are people today on Zoom who could not otherwise have been here, and it's in order to enable them to participate fully that this has now been made permanent. As to clause 2, in 2018, the legislative reform measure was introduced giving Archbishop's Council power, with the approval of General Synod on a case-by-case basis, to make orders removing or reducing burdens resulting from legislation. The measure contained a 5-year sunset clause. Clause 2 removes the sunset provision and makes the measure continue indefinitely. Some members felt now was too soon to remove it, but in February the clear mind of Synod was to make the measure permanent. The change, of course, will be scrutinised by Parliament when it comes to consider this measure as a whole. Clause 3 is another attempt at simplification. Synod will no longer have to approve revisions to the safeguarding code of practice, which are insubstantial or provide guidance on how to comply with the requirements which have been imposed. Clause 4 removes the requirement for General Synod to approve a change to the name of a suffragan see in contrast to a diocesan see. Clause 5 amends the terms of service regulations to make modest improvements to common tenure. Clause 6 removes a restriction on bishops acting during vacancies in diocesan sees and gives archbishops a power to delegate archiepiscopal functions to another bishop where the bishop is unable to exercise his or her functions because the bishop is on sabbatical or overseas or likewise. Clause 7 provides that the constitution of a cathedral may permit the appointment of lay residentiary canons. The Revision Committee found this to be the most contentious proposal and spent some considerable time debating it. In the end, when the matter was put before you in February, it received strong support. Clause 7 must be read together with Schedule 1 to the measure. I've already mentioned Clause 8, the subject of the special amendment. Clause 9 amends the law on the appointment and retirement of ecclesiastical judges. Clause 10 concerns the training requirement to be met by ecclesiastical judges. Clause 11 amends the legislation on ecclesiastical disciplinary proceedings, making legal aid more widely available and streamlining the appeal process. Clause 12 puts the provision for the broadcast of proceedings in an ecclesiastical court on a statutory footing. Clause 13 amends various provisions that are concerned with the care of churches. Clause 14 is concerned with the care of land and removes lacunae, updates references, and removes unnecessary provisions. One aspect of this provision was substantially amended by General Synod at the revision stage in February, following a very healthy, considered debate. The power of the disposal in the absence of an incumbent will rest with the priest in charge rather than the bishop. Clause 15 deals with the care of cathedrals, in particular the procedure for a cathedral to put any of its objects of special interest on display. Clause 16 is another that has to do with church property, allowing for a wider category of professionals brought in to advise on any proposal to lease glebe land. Some minor changes to the church representational rules are made by Clause 17. Other more radical proposals, which received the unanimous support of the revision committee, were referred to the elections review group, who have agreed to consider both points promptly as part of a more general review. Clause 18 amends the Church Commissioner's procedures to reflect usual practice for a large charity dealing with complex financial transactions. Some members queried the need to allow commissioners to delegate functions to a subcommittee. They were, though, reassured to note that the clause already imposes the same procedural safeguards on delegations to subcommittees as it does on committees. Clause 19 provides that where the see of one of the archbishops is vacant, the joint power of the archbishops to make appointments to the pensions board will instead be exercisable by the other archbishop. Clause 20 puts into effect an inspired suggestion made this time last year by Aidan Hargreaves-Smith that we make provision for church bodies more generally to hold remote and hybrid meetings in the same way as Synod does. The applicable provisions are set out in Schedule 2. Clause 21 is a drafting amendment that brings into one place the synodical procedure for making orders under this measure itself, and Clause 22 contains the standard provisions on commencement and extent. Well, that was something of a canter through diverse provisions. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening so carefully. Madam Chair, I move that the measure entitled Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions Measure be finally approved.
Thank you. Item 503 is now open for debate. Please may I remind the members that on the Standing Order 64, motions for the closure or next business are not in order in this debate. The speech limit will be set at 5 minutes. So this gentleman here, followed by the gentleman there. Thank you.
Adrian Greenwood, Southwark 415. I want to congratulate the Steering Committee on putting together such a comprehensive set of items in this miscellaneous provisions measure, which is always the joy of Synod to have at least one of these in every quinquennium. And whilst we recognise, like in Paul's image of the body of Christ, that each of these individual items is of equal value and has equal status in the law of the land, I particularly want to put on record my support for item 7, lay residentiary canons. This matter was first raised in relation to by the former Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, and I'm so pleased that, and the Bishop is nodding, that we've reached this stage where Paul the Gooder can be made a canon of the cathedral which he serves. So that is great news. Thank you so much for everyone for steering that through. And I would just put out a plea to the other 41 dioceses that now that this power exists, you might like to use it in your cathedral. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Canon Peter Bruin-Wells, 318 Guildford. I really do welcome this particular measure. I congratulate Stephen Hoffmeyer, KC, and the team. It was an interesting presentation today. Some of these measures can be incredibly boring and tedious, and as a former MP, I've had to receive them across the way, but this is good news. I'm so pleased that the Synod will be open to all by having hybrid and remote meetings. So clause 1 is to be really welcomed. I've got Geoffrey sitting nearly next door to me. He wanted that, I wanted that. I'm delighted it's there. As to clause 20, yes, again, I welcome it. The only thing I would say, yes, to Aidan Hargreaves, it's great that we will have other meetings allowable for them to be remote. We do have this with a number of meetings for the church commissioners as well, but you also need to have some in person. I think we miss out sometimes from not being able to meet in person and to talk and have the camaraderie before and after votes, sometimes quite difficult votes. As far as the remote meetings and that facility is concerned, it seems to me that the House of Bishops, particularly on the Monday and Tuesday when we're meeting, they can be in the House of Lords as well, because they're needed in the Lords as well. So I think that's important. We move to clause 2 and removing the sunset provisions for the legislative reform measure. Again, I think that is needed. So I feel we've been listened to. I think this is good news for us. I think we become more accountable, but we also are more able to be present. So I welcome it all, and I thank Stephen Hoffmeyer and team.
Thank you. Luke Appleton, followed by Mr. Scowen.
Luke Appleton, 309 Exeter. I think I appreciate that this is in its final stage, but of course, Synod could, and I'm sure it won't, but it could choose to reject it if it needed to be. We're not a rubber stamping body, so I still think that there is a place for scrutiny. I broadly appreciate and am in favour of most of the items in the miscellaneous measure. It was mentioned around Articles 7 and 8 business at the last time we looked at this, and I don't feel that that point has actually been addressed or looked into. If you look in all of the New Testament with the in the Acts of the Apostles at Pentecost, people being gathered together, I'm very in favour of hybrid Zoom, I'm very in favour of hybrid church, but have we thought about it theologically and spiritually, the implication when we're discussing our most important business of having not everybody in the same space? And so I think that is something, I'm sure this will all go through, but it might be something we want to keep an eye on, whether there is a theological impact if we are discussing our most important business. Thank you.
Thank you. And bearing in mind that we are in two different spaces, I am looking on Zoom and there is nothing there yet. Mr. Scowen.
Thank you. It's Clive Scowen, London 358. I just wanted to pick up on something Mr. Hoffmeyer mentioned, which was the provision which the steering committee or the revision committee unanimously endorsed, but then removed and referred to the elections review group. If you've read the papers for the rest of Synod, you will have seen that on Monday we will be considering the report of the elections review group, which has indeed done what we were asked to do, and that report makes some recommendations, and that will be followed immediately by a resolution to be made to amend the church representation rules to give effect to those recommendations. It's all to do with what happens at annual meetings when there aren't enough candidates, and also with the need to ensure that people who are elected to our PCCs are qualified and not disqualified from serving. So that matter will come to Synod on Monday afternoon, even though it's not in this measure. Also, just to respond to something Luke Appleton said just now, even though the ban on taking Article 7 and 8 business at remote or hybrid meetings has been removed, it will still be in the discretion of the Business Committee as to whether it was appropriate to take such business at, for example, a fully remote meeting. And some of us, at least on the Business Committee, will be astute to make sure that we don't do what we judge we ought not to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see someone standing here. Yes, would you like to speak? Sorry.
Do I start now? Good morning. I want to thank you, Bishop Rose, for calling me. My name is Sarah Tupling. I'm from Derby and I'm one of the 3 representatives for the Deaf Anglicans Together team. Oh, how long do I have? Sorry, Rose. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Great, okay, I'll pace myself. Right, I've said my name, I said I am. My number, right, yes, I am. My number is 471. Right, okay. So this is one of those spontaneous reactions, actually, to the conversation that I've just been listening to and the legislation. I thought that Stephen Hofmeister explained things so clearly, and it's very obvious that a huge amount of work has been going on for a long time to bring this to where we are today for final approval. There is one area that I would like to keep on Synod's mind, and that is within one of the particular clauses. So when we think about online meetings, hybrid or fully remote, on Zoom or whatever, you know, this is great. It works here. We are here. There are also many people at home watching online, and one of them is actually one of our Deaf Anglicans Together reps. She's watching now online. Now, she has a good command of written English, and so she can access Zoom with the subtitles. What I have been thinking about, however, is how the legislation and how the conversations that we have might meet the needs of a deaf person who doesn't have that kind of command of written English. And I have been informed that there may be a way to provide interpreters, but what I believe we would need is 2 teams, because we would have one group of interpreters who would be working online and another group that would be working here in the chamber. And so there are implications if we do provide BSL interpreting in both formats. But there is something about making sure that we make ourselves accessible to a wide range of deaf people, and actually thinking about people who are deaf and blind as well, and people maybe who have, you know, because not everybody's the same. So I hope that I've raised my point, and I think that's all. Thank you. Please do think about these things.
Thank you, thank you. I'm now going to Zoom first, and after Zoom, then we'll go to the chair of the Business Committee. Val Plum on Zoom. You also have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Bishop Rose. 190 Oxford, Canon Val Plum. Thank you to Sarah Tuplin. That was really enjoyable to hear what you had to say. Yes, like you, Sarah, I'm just picking up on something that Luke said. As somebody who can be described as a seasonal Zoomer, unfortunately, I have immunological problems, so it has remained unsafe for me to be present at this stage while my medication settles down. I think the point I need to make here is present is present, whether I'm on a screen or whether I'm sat next to you. This isn't just about what's the best way to have meetings. This is a disability issue as well. As a priest who is both physically disabled and also neurodiverse, it's critically important that I feel I have a place where I can be with you and actually share my concerns and my views with you without feeling like I should be grateful for this. And I think I can understand what you're saying, that it's important to be together, and I would love to do that. But actually, what happens when we can't? Are we just to be left out on the side? Of course, that's not Christian, and it's not kind, and it's not appropriate, and it doesn't do anything other than make people feel that they're something other than fully human. I have spent most of my working life these last 3 years during this sort of pandemic as it begins to drop down now, but I have done multiple Zoom meetings, I've done training, I've chaired, and actually it does work. And there's also, don't forget, communities of people out there whom we minister to and worship with. So just be mindful, Synod, that when you make this decision, please do it for the reasons that's in your heart, rather than whether or not it's practical. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Robert Hammond, and then I'm going to go back to Zoom for the Bishop of Woolwich.
Robert Hammond, Chelmsford 273, Chair of the Business Committee. Hopefully this will help Mr. Hofmeyr. I'd like to thank Sarah Tupling and Val Plum for their comments. I don't think that directly affects the legislation, the changes that we are being asked to consider, but I would want to say, and indeed which the Business Committee fully support around hybrid meetings. But I want to say the Business Committee absolutely recognise what you, Sarah, and Val have said, and we will continue to work as hard as we can to make sure that our synod is as accessible as possible, both here in the chamber and on Zoom. And we absolutely welcome both your comments and any feedback that you want to give us. So the Business Committee has heard, and we will continue to try our best. Thank you.
Bishop Caraway, followed by the lady standing up there. Thank you, on my right.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair for giving me an opportunity to speak this morning. 045, Caraway, Bishop of Woolwich. I'm delighted to make my maiden speech on this subject of virtual meetings. And I want to thank Stephen Hofmeyr and the team for doing such a brilliant job. I just want to follow on to what has been said by two previous speakers, that we live in an age of technology, first and foremost. And secondly, on a theological basis, the Church of Christ is a body of 2.8 billion Christians all over the world. And it is a virtual church. We might never meet some of them face to face until we get to heaven. But I thank God for modern technology, that today I can be part of this synod, even though I have been unable to travel to York for personal reasons. And I think for a church that is wanting to be young, diverse, inclusive, and more accessible, this is a welcome day for us, that we can make all our meetings hybrid in nature so that it will be accessible, it will be a welcome opportunity for those that we want to include. And like our last sister said, those who cannot join us physically, like myself and many others, will be able to participate in the life of the body of Christ. And I think theologically, it's a day to celebrate. Secondly, it is also very good for the environment. It's good for the environment, it's good for our health, it's good for the health of God's creation, that we can use all the facilities available to us and save so many tons of carbon dioxide that could be let out into the ozone layer at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Rosemary Wilson, Southwark 419. Thank you to the steering committee. Thank you, Mr. Hofmeyr, for a really brilliant piece of a document, because I was able to read it all the way through from the beginning to the end. So really, really grateful for that. Just wanting to pick up on clause 17, elections under church representation rules, 79 subsection 2. I know it was debated last year, I know it went through, but I still have a concern that I just wanted to put out there, which is that the bishop may vary the eligibility requirements for election for a parochial church council by waiving the requirement that a person must be an actual communicant. And I remember the context, this was in terms of messy church, mixed ecology, where we've got people in the community who are becoming part of the church family or becoming part of a church who aren't necessarily Christians, and we want to sort of like, and we need to gather a PCC around these particular types of mixed ecology and messy churches. I understand that. I still feel I wanted to register my concern that we're saying that it's okay to be part of a PCC and not be a Christian. And I just wanted to, as I say, flag that concern. Thank you.
Lady in front of me here.
Dana Delap, Gloucester 122. We've talked about unforeseen consequences of what we're talking about, and talking about unforeseen consequences. And I think this has an unforeseen consequence when we're talking about hybrid church, because present is present, said Valerie Plum. We live in a technological world. All of this is true, but we hit up against this during lockdown when we were talking about communion. And if present is present, then that is the same for God. And we also need to talk about Holy Communion and whether or not hybrid communion is also a possibility. The bishops promised us that we would talk about this and that they would publish something relating to it at the end of 2020. We're now a little way beyond that, and it would be really good for us to think about these unforeseen consequences.
Thank you. I see no one else standing, so I will call on Mr. Hofmeyr to reply to the debate. You have up to 5 minutes.
Stephen Hofmeyr, Guildford 320. May I thank those who thanked my steering committee, who worked very, very hard indeed in relation to these matters. I am most grateful to Adrian, to Peter, and all of those who expressed their gratitude. Thank you for that. In relation to remote and hybrid, I think that the message is clear that we will continue to seek to meet in person as the default insofar as it's possible. But we've heard moving accounts of how important it is for people to have accessibility. And it is of critical importance that we make our meetings accessible to all insofar as it is possible to do so. And particular thanks are due to Sarah and Val for sharing with us their own experiences, and Bishop Carraway as well. And in relation to the point that was made by Sarah of the possibility of two interpreters, two signers being available if matters are dealt with online, well, I will certainly ask the Synod staff team responsible for these matters to look into that in order to see whether it is possible to ensure that you have that accessibility. Thank you, Clive Scowen, for reminding me that the Elections Review Group report is being considered on Monday. Again, Synod B, encouraged by that, we felt unable to deal with the matter properly in this measure. We passed the matter to the Elections Review Group and asked that they deal with it promptly and look at what they've done. They're bringing it back to us very, very quickly. So thank you to the Elections Review Group for dealing with the matter so quickly. Luke Appleton, we note your concerns about having meetings in person. Those have been heard and will be thought through further as time passes. Robert Hammond, thank you for the message that you've brought to us effectively from the Business Committee, that you will continue to make meetings as accessible as possible, and that is certainly what our intention was through this measure. Then Rosemary Wilson, again, thank you for expressing your concern. The bishops here will have heard the concern, both those present and those on Zoom, and I'm sure that they will have regard to those concerns. So far as virtual communion is concerned, that is a matter for another day, but thank you, Dana, for raising the matter. That will be considered in due course by those in the right places at the right times, but now is not the right time nor the right place for us to deal with that, but thank you for raising it. I then, in those circumstances, move the item standing on my name. It's item 503. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hofmeier. The question is that the measure entitled Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions measure be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I am about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote by houses is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
Bishops. This is a counted vote by houses on item 503. Those present in Central Hall using the voting handsets and who wish to vote in favor should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using the buttons on the screen.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period is now ended. Sorry, you're all right. It's fine. Sorry. Sorry.
House of Bishops in favor, 20, 0 against, recorded abstentions 1. House of Clergy in favor, 123, 0 against, abstentions 3. House of Laity in favor, 146, against 1, abstentions 5. The motion is therefore carried. The Church of England Miscellaneous Provisions measure now stands committed to the Legislative Committee. We turn now to item 504. The Synod has reached the final approval stage for draft amending canon number 43. Members will need the draft amending canon GS 2273B and the petition for the royal assent and license GS 2723C. I call on Mr. Stephen Hoffmeyer to move item 504, that the canon entitled Amending Canon number 43 be finally approved. Mr. Hoffmeyer, you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We move then to Amending Canon 43. We're on the last furlong and we move from a canter to a gallop. The draft amending canon contains 16 paragraphs in 3 parts. The first part, paragraphs 1 to 5, on amendments necessitated by the demise of the Crown. The amendments substitute references in the canons to the Queen's Majesty or similar, with references to the King's Majesty or similar. Paragraphs 13 to 16, part 3, are merely updating amendments. Part 2, the central part, paragraphs 6 to 12, contain a potpourri of miscellaneous amendments. Paragraph 6 reinstates a provision that was inadvertently removed. The provision that was inadvertently removed was a provision preventing a church ceasing to be used for public worship altogether unless it is formally closed for worship under the Mission and Pastoral Measure 2011. Paragraphs 7 and 8 relates to the marriage canons, but don't get too excited. They don't deal with what marriage is or what marriage is not, or not directly at least. Paragraph 7 amends canons B31 and B32 by raising the age at which a person may lawfully marry from 16 to 18, in line with the Marriage and Civil Partnership Minimum Age Act 2022. Paragraph 8 amends Canon B34, which is concerned with the legal preliminaries to marriage, and B36, which makes provision for services after civil marriage, in line with recent amendments to the Marriage Act 1949, which replace superintendent registrar's certificates with marriage schedules. Paragraph 9 amends Canon C21 to make it consistent with the measure that you've just assented to, which you've just approved, which made provision for the appointment of lay residentiary canons, so it's a consistency amendment only. Paragraph 10 amends canons F17 and F18, which contain requirements as to the keeping of records of church property and for the survey of church buildings. The amendments are to make life easier when a rural dean is not available. Provision is made for a different person to act in her or his stead. Paragraph 11 provides for the qualifications for appointment as a deputy diocesan or provincial registrar to be the same as for the appointment of a registrar, including the requirement to be a communicant. And paragraph 12 amends the interpretation canon I. The interpretation provisions are extended to regulations made under this canon, Canon 43. So those are the provisions of amending Canon 43. But before I invite General Synod to give the amending canon final approval, may I please take this opportunity to thank you, the members of General Synod, who took an active part in the legislative process, whether through making proposals to the revision committee, through proposing amendments to the draft legislation, or through simply expressing your views in votes. Thank you to each of you. May I also thank the steering committee who have helped me with this process over the last year. Their contribution has been invaluable, and I am grateful to each of them personally. Thank you very much indeed. May I also thank members of the revision committee for doing the heavy lifting during the revision stage. And above all, may I thank the legal team for their work on the legislation. Sage advice and cold towels in equal measure. Thank you. I move that the canon entitled Amending Canon 43 be finally approved.
Thank you. Item 504 is open for debate. May I remind members once more that under Standing Order 64, motions for the closure or move to next business are not in order in this debate. Speech limit is set at 5 minutes. I see no one standing. Therefore, I will be putting this to the vote. The question is that the canon entitled Amending Canon number 43 be finally approved in accordance with Standing Order 37. I order a counted vote by houses. I direct on the Standing Order 38.3 that the ringing of the bell be dispensed with. This is a counted vote by houses on item 504. Those present in Central Hall using the voting handsets and who wish to vote in favor should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using the buttons on the screen.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period is now ended.
The results of the vote: House of Bishops in favor 19, against 0, recorded abstentions 1. House of Clergy in favor 119, against 0, recorded abstention 1. House of Laity in favor 151, against 1, recorded abstention 1. The motion is therefore carried in all 3 houses. I call on Mr. Hofmeyr to move item 505, that the petition for His Majesty's Royal Assent and License, GS 2723C, be adopted. Please move, Mr. Hofmeyr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen Hofmeyr, Guildford 320. Thank you, Synod, for your care and attention that you've paid to this important legislation. I now move that the petition of His Majesty's Royal Assent and License, GS 2723C, be adopted.
Thank you. This item is now open for debate. I see no one standing, and therefore this will now go to the vote, and a simple show of hands is all that is required. If you are online, then a green tick will suffice. Those in favor, please show. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. The petition will accordingly be presented to His Majesty, having been carried. Thank you. That concludes this item of business. Thank you.
Press the bell, get going.
Yeah.
All right?
You've got your script.
I've got my script. Members of Synod, we now move to the next item of business, which is 506. Amending Canon number 42 received final approval from the Synod at the February 23 group of sessions. I have to report to the Synod that the Royal Assent and Licence has been given in respect of the Amending Canon. Under Standing Order 68, once the instrument of enactment for the canon has been read to the Synod, the motion appearing on the order paper must be put to the Synod and voted on without debate. I call upon the Registrar to read the instrument of enactment.
Constitutions and canons ecclesiastical maturely treated upon by the archbishops, bishops, clergy and laity of the Church of England in their synod begun at Westminster in the year of our Lord 2021 and in the 70th year of the reign of our late Sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth II of blessed and glorious memory, and continued in being upon the accession of our Sovereign Lord King Charles III by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, being a canon entitled Amending Canon number 42, which received His Majesty's Royal Assent and Licence on the 9th day of June 2023. We, being the Presidents, the Prolocutor of the Convocation of Canterbury, the Prolocutor of the Convocation of York, and the Chair and Vice-Chair of the House of Laity of the said Synod, do hereby declare and testify our consent to the said canon entitled Amending Canon number 42, and in testimony of such our consent, we have hereunto subscribed our names as hereafter follows. Dated this 8th day of July in the year of our Lord 2023, and in the first year of the reign of our Sovereign Lord King Charles III.
I therefore move that the canon entitled Amending Canon number 42 be made, promulged and executed. Would those in favour please show? Thank you. Would those against please show? That is clearly carried. The instrument of enactment having been signed by myself and the Archbishop of York and the Chair and the Vice Chair of the House of Laity, and shortly to be signed by the prolocutors, the canon will now be sent for proclamation in the diocesan synods in the usual way, and that completes this item of business.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I think it's valid. Oh, I'm sure.
Good morning, Synod. May I first start with a housekeeping point. The air conditioning is on, and we get the best effect from that if we keep the doors of the chamber closed. So that's the two doors going out and the doors at the top. Thank you very much. We now come to item 8 on climate change. Members will need GS 2032. Point of order.
Daily 376, under Standing Order 33, I move that we proceed to next business.
Thank you. I will just take some advice on that. Thank you for your patience. Ms Staley has moved the procedural motion that the Synod do pass to the next business. If that procedural motion is carried, item 8 will lapse, and it will not be in order to reconsider the question in the same form or in a form that is substantially similar within the lifetime of the Synod, except with the permission of the Business Committee and the general consent of Synod. So we now debate this motion. The motion for next business is going to be debated, and I call on So the motion for next business may be debated at my discretion, and I call on Ms Staley as mover of this motion to speak to it. First of all, please.
Thank you, Prudence Daly, 376 Oxford. After the chairman of the Business Committee advised me yesterday that my knowledge of standing orders in relation to presentations is 13 years out of date, I wanted to give the Synod the opportunity to express its mind on the subject of having a presentation at this stage. We've received a written report on this subject, and we're also having a debate later on in this group of sessions, during which the proposer of the motion will have the opportunity of the opening speech to present the most important points. I'm sure we will be presented with compelling reasons why we should have this presentation at this stage, but given the pressure of business that we are under in this group of sessions, I would invite the Synod to consider whether that is the best use of our time at this moment.
Thank you. I now call on the main speaker to reply. You have up to 3 minutes.
Alan Smith, L457. Prudence, thank you very much for that. It's a really important thing because even yesterday when I heard those opening challenges about presentations, it actually made me go and reflect. And I actually tore up the talk that I had to give the presentation, to give the talk that we are coming here to give now, because we should not, I can understand why people misunderstand the word presentation, but what Clive and myself are coming here today is an act of accountability to Synod. Synod, 5 years ago, you asked us to do something around what is the defining issue of our age, climate change, and how we've acted in consort with you to do that. And that is what we're about to do. So we can play with words, but what this session here is about is us being accountable to what you've asked us to do over what is the defining issue of the age. So I would hope that we could continue in the slot that you've asked us to do. Thank you very much.
I do not consider that the motion for next business needs to be debated further. I therefore put the motion to Synod. Those in favour of the motion that the Synod do pass to next business, please show. Thank you. Those against, please show. That is clearly lost. So we continue with this item. Thank you. I call on Mr. Smith to start the presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Synod. It is a real privilege to be here today with Clive Mather, Chair of the Church of England's Pension Board, to give some introductory comments on our report in GS 2303 approach to climate change before, more importantly, getting your questions and perspectives. And being here is more than a privilege, it's our responsibility. We're here to report back to you. 5 years on, as we committed, from when we, as the national investing bodies, were asked by you, Synod, in 2018 to respond to your motion on climate change. And that is set out in the report. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, it goes without saying that climate change is and will be one of the prime defining issues of our generation and generations to come. Alongside Clive and myself, we have members of all three of the national investment bodies to whom that motion was addressed. The Pension Board, the CBF funds managed by CCLA, that's done on behalf of 14,000 Church of England organizations, and the Church Commissioners. We are reporting here today as a result of their excellent work, and we'd like to express our deep gratitude to that entire team for their excellence, their professionalism, and the integrity of their work. We'd also, more importantly, though, like to thank you, Synod. You see, this journey here on this slide of the last decade, but actually really which started 2 decades ago, represents an integrated leading approach of how to address climate change. It's actually us as an integrated Church of England, through our common faith, setting best practice standards on climate change around some important issues, of how we clearly articulate climate change policy, of setting targets, of acting intentionally towards achieving those targets, and through us being co-founders of very important industry-leading bodies, again with the encouragement and endorsement of Synod, like Climate Action 100+, and the Transition Pathway Initiative that seeks to set standards for companies across the economy on climate change, through shaping in a very disciplined and evidence-based way how we engage with firms as part of an integrated engagement and divestment program with the world's largest and most consequential companies, including and in particular the fossil fuel companies, again, as you asked us to engage with the motion. And very, very importantly, through an unequivocal articulation that the target for net zero must be keeping average global temperature rises to below 1.5 degrees C compared to pre-industrial levels. The kind of mantra of 1.5 to stay alive is not just a slogan. It is actually essential to if we are to flourish as communities. And that work that we've done with the encouragement and support of Synod has been fundamentally important. So we thank you for that, Synod. But actually, Synod, this journey represented on this slide represents something more profound. It represents Synod and synodality at its most powerful. Synodality means refusing to go it alone. Synodality means insisting on walking together. Synod means walking together on the same road. This pathway here is exactly that. So what we've done, Synod, what we've responded to you is not just about climate change. It's about the essence of what being a Synod is. And we as of all the NIBs are very, very thankful that you've engaged with us and challenged us and supported us on that journey. That road that we're walking together, though, has come to actually a very important crossroads, as you'd have seen very recently around our engagement and divestment program. Now, engagement and divestment is actually just one of a number of approaches that all of the NIBs use, and in particular us at the Church Commissioners use as we address climate change. But it's the one that gets the most focus. You would have read last week about our decision at the Church Commissioners to exclude 11 oil and gas companies for their failure to align with climate change goals. It was not a decision taken lightly. It was evidence-based and data-driven. It was a sobering decision because it means that we haven't seen the leadership that we would have expected and hoped for in some of the world's most consequential companies in leading on this. By the end of 2023, the Church Commissioners are excluding all oil and gas majors from their portfolio and will exclude all other companies primarily engaged in oil and gas exploration, production, and refining, unless they are in genuine alignment to a 1.5 degrees pathway. In making these decisions, it is important to set out some important principles. This decision is not just about emissions. It's also about investment discipline. Companies that are not meaningfully allocating capital in support of the transition are not the companies of the future. We believe in engagement and divestment. It's a bit like faith and works. Faith without works is dead. Engagement is faith, divestment is works. The fossil fuel companies have not worked meaningfully on this. We must now work and divest. Our investment in them is now dead for the time being. We, though, believe in reconciliation and working together. We would be prepared to reinvest in energy majors in the future if such companies are seen to become Paris-aligned in a clear, evidence-based and data-driven manner, while also meeting our risk-return targets within our portfolio and our capital allocation principles. Our paper notes, Synod, that we're at a crossroads. I would expand on it a bit and give it another framing. We are either crossing the Red Sea or the River Jordan in how we engage going forward. We must ensure that it's the Jordan that we're crossing. We don't have 40 years to waste. Synod, that was our perspectives, and I'd like now to hand over to Clive to share what the Pensions Board are doing. Clive.
Thank you, Alan. Clive Mather, 460. So we have engaged as a pension board with the oil and gas sector for over 10 years, vigorously and rigorously. And we have achieved much. But we did not achieve the standard that we brought to you 5 years ago, that they would be aligned with a trajectory to 1.5 degrees centigrade in the short, medium, and long term. So we have excluded them from our investment portfolio. It is good that we made the commitment. It is good that we tracked it, pushed as hard as we can, and it is good as a consequence that we have demonstrated our intent. But it is still sad. It is sad that we did not succeed. It would have been better if we could have persuaded them. But it was clear. Now we may go back, but we would need very credible evidence over an extended period to be sure if we were to reinstate our investments. So now the focus moves. We will not be engaging directly with these oil companies as shareholders, but we will continue to engage with them, and we will put more focus on the demand side of the equation. Because if you can choke the demand, that has a very, very immediate and compelling impact on production. So car manufacturing, utilities, steel, and so on. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I had to do it. It may not be easy to see this graph, and if you read the report, you will understand the extent to which we track these various companies in terms of their commitments against the standards we need. But you can see that, although all of them will talk about a pathway to 2050, that is nowhere near good enough in the short and medium term. Hence, for us, it was perfectly clear that we had no option but to divest. But we have achieved much, Synod. I am enormously proud of what small teams of dedicated people have done over the past 5 years. The Transition Pathway Initiative is an extraordinary gift to the world. We are talking about going up to 10,000 companies that they will review and report on publicly. We are talking about simply astonishing levels of assets under management that we can influence. We have, through Climate Action 100, brought something like 75% of the major emitters to develop standards. They may not be good enough, but this is an enormously important start. And we will continue to do that. And we will continue to do that with all the resources that we have. But if I had one message I would leave to you is, if you engage with the teams, be it in CCLA or in the Church Commissioners or in the Pensions Board, please do say thank you for people who have gone an extraordinary extra mile to bring us to where we are. So, we look ahead. We have disinvested, we have not disengaged, and the hard work continues. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have a time for questions. You will see from the order paper that the next item is questions, which is a continuation from yesterday, and that starts at no later than 11:45. So we have got a hard stop. I'll be taking these in groups of 3, and their questions, please. And I'll start with you, Bishop, then the man in front of me, then Clive Scowen, please.
Robert Innes, Europe 17. And I want to express my huge congratulations to the National Investment Boards for this extraordinary achievement. It is simply huge. And for a church like ours to be a player on the world scene to the degree that we are is simply remarkable. So as a bishop, thank you so much for this. What I would say is that I would love our church to be able to project this good news more effectively into the public square. I would love that we are known as the Church of England, not as a church that is always associated with divisive issues around sex and gender, but as a church which is known as a leader in the fight to control and combat climate change. When I talk to other people, even in our own church, and other church leaders, they've rarely heard of the Transition Pathways Initiative. And yet it is extremely important at a world level. And so I'd love our communications departments to put their thinking caps on and try to project what is a rather abstract story, but one nonetheless which is of fundamental importance, out into the public square in a more effective way. Thank you very much.
Nigel Bacon, Lincoln 342. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. And as it may be seen as being relevant by some, I should declare that I am a chartered engineer. I'm also heavily supportive of the direction being taken by the NIBs, and I commend them for the stance that they're taking. My question, though, relates to what is seen as a divisive subject by some, and that's the question of nuclear power, which many expert commentators see as being an essential component of a zero-carbon future for times when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow. I'd be interested in knowing what the NIB's position is on nuclear energy-related tech investment in, for example, micro-nuclear reactor technology. Thank you.
debate, we've heard, particularly from Mr. Mather, about the extraordinary achievements of engagement in the last few years, which has arisen from the shareholdings that we had in the oil and gas majors. I wonder if it could be explained to Synod, now we are selling those shares, presumably to people who don't share our ethical commitment with regard to Paris alignment and what the transition pathways were seeking to do. How is that going to help to achieve what we've been seeking to achieve all along, of persuading those companies we're disinvesting from to move in the direction we want them to move?
Thank you. Now we'll have some responses, please.
Thanks. I'll take that first one and the third one, and then Clive will speak to the nuclear point. On that point of coverage and how we communicate, it's a very important thing, and you've actually seen how, you know, even with our press release recently, how that got a lot of effect. We also, though, Synod, need to be humble, because this is a complex issue. I'll give you a real example of the complexity. In one of our land holdings quite recently, we actually found out there's an oil well on it. No, it hasn't got in the press as yet. No, but actually it's quite right that that person is doing that. Now, what is interesting, because that oil well is on lots of land, it's most probably that that property is negative emissions. You know, and it brings out the complexities. And we're in a world, as we need to communicate, and we're very conscious of that, that we are wise. We need to be communicating, but we also need to be humble, because there's some really complex stuff out there. On Clive, you're right. Engaging and divesting means that we're no longer at the table with those companies. There are two dimensions. There's the dimension of how we steward the money on behalf of the church. And actually, if you look at the long-term returns of the commissioners, where we have actually been excluding oil and gas through some of our areas already, it hasn't affected our returns. So from a stewardship point of view, in support of the church, that is not to worry. I think one of the key things with the oil majors, and it was why it was so sobering, was that they have not moved. And in this last year, when it was at such an important point, they had not moved, almost to the extent that we have to be careful that people aren't engagement washing. Because there's a certain way in which these big firms, by engaging with entities like ourselves, it becomes a rubber stamp. And in the way in which they have rolled back in this last year, it was important for us to reflect on that. I think when we were discussing it with so many, actually, Archbishop Stephen actually gave us a very good bit of scripture when he says, our Lord says, sometimes you just have to shake the dust off of your feet. And that is what we've had to do at this point in time, because they have not moved us intentionally. But we're also clear in terms of us stewarding the money on behalf of the church, that will not stop us getting the long-term returns that we need in support of ensuring that we're supporting our mission. And Clive, you take the one on nuclear.
Yes, thank you. Nigel, you make a good point, because clearly at a headline level, nuclear is an extraordinary provider of electricity at low carbon levels, and ideal when demand is stable. Stable in terms of the normal utility requirement of nations and communities for electricity and power. However, there are three big issues. The first one is, of course, public concern. The word nuclear tends to trigger an emotional reaction, and it doesn't help with current commentary around weapons moving into Belarus. People are fearful, and there have been some bad accidents. If you compare those accidents with other risks in society, for example, motoring, they pale into insignificance. But in the public mind, they're very real. Secondly, the carbon balance is very complicated because of the amount of concrete and steel and infrastructure that is needed. And finally, the timescales. As we know in the UK, had we invested perhaps 10, 15 years ago, we would be in a far better position than we are today. We didn't, and those investments are still under discussion and still in planning. And for all I know, the world will have fried before they come on stream. But I would say, and I, in a sense, have to declare an interest, I am part of a group in North America that has been investing in small-scale nuclear reactors. This is not an investment of my money. I am part of the technical expertise in developing them, because the opportunity, particularly in rural areas, to make a very big difference and immediately and wholly displace coal, oil and gas is highly attractive. So I am putting some personal effort into that, and as a pensions board we will look at all the options and measure them against the full scale of risks. But I cannot give you any commitment at this stage given the reasons I laid out a moment ago. We will keep it under review, and I hope something may happen.
Thank you. We'll now move to our next group of three, and please may I call on the lady right at the back, please, and the lady down here, and the gentleman here. Thank you.
Cat Campionsville, Bristol, 71. One of the delights of being the rector of a medieval church is that I find myself a trustee of several charitable historic trusts connected with the church, which between them have investments worth about £2 million. Now, I know that pales into insignificance compared to what you're managing, but I was encouraged last week to hear one of the trustees say, we should be using the Church of England investment principles to make sure that the way we use our money is aligned with our faith. Not all of the trusts I'm involved with have that attitude. So I guess my question is how, I won't be alone in having influence over a small but not insignificant investment. So the question is, how can we apply the principles you've developed to the amounts that we might have influence over? And can that add weight to what you're doing? Thank you.
Ruth Newton, Leeds 137. I want to thank those working for the NIBS for fulfilling the strategy set out by this synod 5 years ago with integrity and creativity and transparency, and for doing precisely what we asked, both in your work on engagement and the decision to disinvest, which has been impactful. I would like clarity about whether the decision to disinvest from fossil fuel companies means that the principles of engagement and the Transition Pathway Initiative, which this synod endorsed, are still undergirding the NIBS approach, and also on the ongoing usefulness of the TPI.
Graham Usher, 029, Norwich, but speaking as the lead bishop for the environment. A huge thank you for this presentation and for the outstanding work that has happened. I'm very grateful to the staff of the NIBS, who I know are passionate about this subject and have worked incredibly hard over a number of years. I've really valued the engagement that the Environment Working Group has been able to have with you. Thank you for that. Whilst we have done much, and this report shows what has been achieved, ultimately we have failed in the motion that this synod brought. And for me, that is a source of huge lament. The cry of creation is calling out amongst us all. The prophetic voice of the fifth mark of mission is something that should be ringing in all our ears, because climate change knows no international borders and its impact is being seen all around us. So my two questions looking forward, with this source of this cry of lament ringing in my ears, is first of all, how will we use our investments in the future to have a positive impact in terms of investing in new technologies? And secondly, how might we use our investments to ensure a just transition, particularly for those nations around the Anglican Communion, our sisters and brothers, who are on the front line of climate change? I have the voice of the Bishop of Vanuatu speaking as he did at the Lambeth Conference last year, saying, "My islands are sinking." I hear the voice of Archbishop Cyril, who's with us from West Africa, who's seeing drought in the northern parts of his province. So how will the NIBS work positively for climate change in investments in new technology, and how will you ensure a just transition, particularly for the poorest people in the world? Thank you.
Thanks. A response, please.
Thank you. Kat, thank you for your question, and thank you for your personal engagement in this and your willingness to do things differently. Of course, for all sorts of legal and other reasons, I'm not in a position to guide you formally. We can't tell you what to do. What we can do is provide you with lots of information and material. I would start with the Ethical Investment Advisory Group. Look at my dear friend Bishop David, which has done extraordinary work on this and many other issues that connect with our environmental, social, and governance responsibility. And of course, specifically in this space, we produce material all the time around how we are investing, the results of our investments, and the principles which underpin our work. And that comes through in material on the web, it comes through in our annual stewardship report, etc. And indeed, at any stage, the team is available to you. So please do use us. On the question of engagement and the TPI, we, in no sense, are reducing our commitment to engage. And we will continue to use every opportunity to engage with oil and gas companies, although that is now slightly hampered by the massive publicity that surrounded our announcements, and of course the fact that we don't own the stock. But we will continue to engage through every channel that we can. And in that, the TPI and the TPI index are essential components. I do feel, and some of you in this room were there when we launched the Transition Pathway Initiative and then when we launched the index on the stock exchange, you will know what a gift this is to the world. It's a gift. We do not charge for this. And some very important stakeholders have funded this privately to ensure that the work done through the London Stock Exchange and through the London School of Economics and the other key partners like ourselves, who are pension funds, institutional investors, etc., their work is available for free. Isn't that special? You have access to the most rigorous, meticulous, academic, objective, independent assessment, and you don't have to pay for it. So, yeah, we are going to continue. We will grow that. We, in part, of course, are part of the governance structure ourselves. And it will grow organically because the world needs it. And so many corporates now, recognizing the investment challenge they're under, are tracking themselves by comparison to their peers. And that's a really great way of achieving learning. I don't know about you, but any league table, if I'm at the bottom of it, I tend to think, what? How can we do better? And that's what's happening in the real world. And TPI, remember, is not just oil and gas. It's right across the sectors, attempting to address all of the high emitters in every part of our society. Thank you. Alan, will you take it?
Thanks, Bishop Graham. I guess thanks for your immense counsel and support. We're both sobered, but actually we're quite hopeful also about this. You know, people say the darkest hour is just before dawn, and this last year is quite sobering, and it's led to the decisions that we've taken. But if we reflect, and I think it's the power of how, you know, Synod, you've encouraged and supported us to act, we have a lot more agency than we think. And I think it's really important. So even that earlier question about, you know, that fund, you may only have 2 million, but actually in global capital markets perspectives, the Church Commissioner's 10 billion is like 2 cents. And so it's really important that you have that ability, even as we're going for a just transition, to realize that we have a lot more agency, because what we're dealing here is not with the example of our power, but the power of our example. And that is very, very important. And it's actually how we as a body have been able to have the influences on that point. And so Bishop Gray, I think that is a really, really important point, that even as we are in a very tough place, that we have a lot more agency, and I would say a reason for hope. In a very powerful way. And how are we looking at investing in the future? Obviously, there are those dimensions, even already within our portfolio. We've moved about £800 million of investments in direct renewables and green energy. But we believe that actually, again, it comes back to more than just looking at money, but using our voice, using our values to engage around the just transition. We, within the responsible investment team, have just brought in someone who's focusing on the human rights dimensions of it, because so much of the social side, the environmental side, and the governance side are all interlinked to whether companies function properly and create value in our economies and create just value. Because we look at it as almost as we want a just transition, and it must be a just in as we move into the new, to the new economy, that everyone gets a fair, fairly considering that. It must be a just out as we move away from fossil fuel industries, for example, that communities aren't left behind. We must be seeking justice, and it can't be just us. Because so much of this thing is focused on just our narrow world. But as we said from a Church Commissioner's point of view, we don't want just a Church Commissioner's net zero portfolio. We want a net zero world. Because, just as, the Bible says the rain will fall on the just and the unjust, climate change is going to do exactly that, even though it's hitting some other communities first. So that is very much about how we look at it from the commissioners. But if there is one thing which we think is essential to ensuring that justice and that just transition, in particular in vulnerable economies and communities, is making sure we have that laser-like target on ensuring that everyone is aligned to 1.5 degrees C. There's a lot of political, there's a lot of social thing which says we're going to miss that target, let's give up on it now. But no, we have to keep it. even if there's an overshoot and we have to pull back, we must keep it, because what happens between 1.5 degrees C and 2 degrees C is quite fundamental. So if we're actually talking about justice, if we're talking about flourishing economies, if we're talking about healthy economies, and not just in the emerging world, but here we very much view it that target of making sure that everything is aligned, all our processes, our engagement, how we invest towards that is essential to achieving justice. So that's how we're looking at it.
I'm having a look on Zoom, and there's no one on Zoom, so I'll restrict myself to the chamber. The lady in black, please, up there. The lady down here, and the gentleman there, please. Yes, you, sir.
Robert Shaw, 217 Sheffield. First of all, I need to say that I am a member of the Pensions Board. God has a huge sense of humour. Two things. First of all, as a member of the Pensions Board and having not sat on a board such as that before, I have been absolutely blown away by the level of stuff that happens there, both from the exec and from the board. It is absolutely brilliant. I wondered if, having seen all the work that's been done by the TPI, and particularly what we've seen from Adam Matthews, whether Synod would be willing to send a formal thank you for all the hard work that has been done to get to this point and to be divested. The second point I would like to make is a question to all of Synod. I'm looking around once again, and there are probably about half of the people missing, and it's a really, really important issue. How, Synod, do we make sure that people outside this chamber see we are bothered about the world and about these things that are happening, and not just bothered about one issue? Thank you.
Cathy Rhodes, Sheffield, 410. Conflict of interest, I'm the chair of the General Synod Environment Group and the Environment Officer for Sheffield, and I've campaigned for divestment, so was absolutely delighted to hear the news of divestment. In view of the fact that the International Energy Agency has said there can be no new fossil fuel developments if the world is to limit global heating to that important 1.5 degrees, I'd be very grateful for a really clear statement that I believe all would welcome, that's very accessible, that the NIBs will not reinvest in oil and gas companies that are planning to explore for and or develop new fossil fuel resources and or reserves. Thank you.
Martin Poole, Chichester 97. Thanks for calling me, Chair. Thank you for your work on this and your recent action on disinvestment and the ensuing publicity. It's been fantastic. How can you use the NRB and the Pension Board, how can you use the power of your example to encourage dioceses like my own to follow your excellent lead? Thank you.
Apologies. Eleanor, thank you. Thank you for your great work. I would love it if Synod would, by acclamation, send a message back to Adam, but all of the guys. Thank you. We will take that back. Bless you. I won't comment on attendance in the chamber. I know myself Synod is a special time in terms of catching up with so many people and other agendas. But yes, of course, Eleanor, if there is one issue on which we all need to apply ourselves personally, professionally, in all our various roles, and not least on our knees, it's climate change. Cathy, yes, we have given that commitment. There is actually, I think, a written question to which we've replied, and the number is 229. And so if you look at your papers, you'll see under 229 that we are quite clear about the circumstances in which we would consider reinvestment, and that is a very high hurdle indeed. So we're not going into this with any sense of backsliding at all. We're clear what we need, and we will hold companies fully to account in every respect. Thank you.
Thanks. And on that one about engaging with dioceses, it's one that I will take up with Bishop Graham. Obviously, we have quite a lot of bilateral discussion with diocesan finance leads and boards, but I'll take that one with Bishop Graham, because I think there is room for us taking it even further from that point of view. And so, Bishop Graham, if we can take forward as to how we can be more intentional in ensuring best practice, but also in learning from the, from across the dioceses on that.
Thanks. The man in the blue shirt, the man in the check shirt, and the and Carl Hughes, please.
Thank you, Chair. The man in the blue shirt called Ian Johnston, 378 from Portsmouth. Being objective, what effect on the oil majors has our disinvestment had? There is a feeling outside this hall that this is virtue signalling, that as far as they're concerned, they will find another investor, and so it doesn't really matter, and that the church is virtue signalling, something of which I think it can be described on other occasions. Also, on nuclear, if I can just come back to a very quick point on that, I think the public needs to be educated better on nuclear, and I think we can help in that. The question I have is, how much are we investing in the development of new technologies specifically? I'm reminded that the Chinese, for example, are developing a 5 megawatt thorium-based reactor which will fit inside a shipping container. And you could put 2 or 3 of those around my town, and that would supply us with all the energy and heat that we need. Are we looking at really radical solutions, or are we just taking the easy way out, disinvesting in the easy things to disinvest in, and not really doing enough otherwise? Thank you.
Michael Beasley, Bath and Wells 006. I just want to add my thanks for this and wish this could be the main story coming out of this synod. Could you tell us a little bit more about how the disinvestment that we have done, how that is leading to conversation with other investors, and what fruit of that are you starting to see? And we all speak into the public square as well. What would you like us to say about the disinvestment decisions that have been made?
Carl Hughes, Southwark 416. I'd just like to ask a slightly bigger picture question, particularly of Clive and Alan. I mean, clearly, we are all focused on climate change and energy transition, the key word being transition. However, current oil demand is running at 102 million barrels per day. It continues to increase slowly, and clearly there will be a need for oil for many years to come. And that is unfortunately, just a reality. I would contend that the world's most responsible oil producers are actually the international oil companies, BP, Shell, Total, Exxon, etc. And if we do not continue to invest in those companies, their production in the medium term will be displaced to production from Russia, the Middle East, and East Asia. And many of the national oil companies do not have anything like the ESG credentials that the listed Western majors have. I would just welcome your comment on that in terms of the reality of the energy balance and likely increases in demand, particularly from developing countries rather than OECD countries over the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. You raised three questions, if I heard you. One was impact on the majors. Yes, they will find other investors, and that is the sadness of our decision to disinvest. The word lament was used. Although in reality, of course, many of these oil and gas companies are currently buying back shares, so they're not in a position that they need new shareholder funds. But I don't want that to hang in the sense that, therefore, this was a futile gesture. This was not a futile gesture. This hurt them. And this brings them into yet sharper focus, not just in the public debate, in the political debate, in the environmental debate, but specifically in terms of their long-term investors, for whom the risk attached to stranded assets, the risks attached to the opprobrium that markets will give to these companies for their lack of stewardship, will dent their long-term returns. So, yes, financially right now, not big impact. But I am convinced very real impact going forward. On nuclear, yes, fully agree about education. It is complicated, and government policy is not clear. Commitment is lacking, and if we could build a foundation of understanding, that would help. And new technologies, very much so. We already hold something like 5% of our, 5% of our equities in climate solutions and new technologies, and we will continue to develop that going forward, having assessed them, of course, against all of our normal criteria. Let's be quite clear, some of the new technologies are very high risk. Now, if you're somebody with lots of free cash and you fancy high risk, high reward investments, these may be for you. But as a pension fund with a clear fiduciary responsibility to provide investment returns for the long term, we have to look in a more prudent lens. And Michael, will divestment trigger other conversations? I think very much so. Can I just flag two specific aspects? One is that much as I enjoy genuinely the recognition of Synod and the recognition of the media and the recognition of wider society for the work we've done, in reality, we do this in partnership. And we have friends, committed friends, right around the world, institutional investors, pension funds like ourselves, but also academics, politicians, and so on. And through our many partnerships, we can multiply our own resources and our own efforts to huge impact. And through that, That little mustard seed is growing and growing and growing. The other thing I would say is, and I'm sure like many others in this room, climate change and the need to address it is not something new in their lives. This is a slow burn. It's like having a stone with a piece of elastic. And you know, you pull and pull and pull and nothing seems to happen, and then it moves. We haven't reached that point, but I think we're getting close when this is really going to move. And it has to, because the warning signs are visible every day. So, through our partnerships and with God's grace, the wider acceptance that will accelerate what we're doing, we are going to get there. Alan.
Thanks. Carl, you actually ask a fundamentally important question. And it's important for us to reflect and remember, as I said, our decision is very much evidence-based and driven. And I guess one of the key things about why we took that decision to divest of the majors, in particular the Western oil majors, is actually an act of corporate governance. One of the big things, and you know better than I do, Carl, that drives energy forecasts is the International Energy Agency. It underpins our stuff. Now, that has been the industry body for the energy agency, for the oil majors, and it's their forecasts that are saying that, one, that we have to hit net zero in 2050, that actually there should be no new investment in fossil fuels, in oil and gas, because there's actually enough there that we've discovered that can get us through the transition. So this is their industry that is saying that, and they've chosen to ignore it. It's a bit like if you're an Anglican and saying you don't want to believe the canons. That is it. Quite genuinely, that the industry, by the standards that they have set up for a body, has something which says the transition is on the way, you don't need to do more this than this. And so when we see that, it actually becomes an issue of governance, because it's a company that signed up to something and is not doing what it says on the tin. We do recognize their importance. And we would hope and want that our Western companies on our markets would be doing that. But if we look at a couple of the big listed energy majors, they have set targets, and then this year have rolled back on them. And so Carl, yeah, we do that because while we talk about, you're right, we talk about the standards in other, in kind of other markets that are not regulated to the same extent, but what we're saying is that these companies who we've engaged in are not operating to the standards that we would expect, not just in terms of emissions, but actually in terms of what we would expect good governance, that you don't give a target and then roll back on it, in particular when you've made so much money from the windfalls of higher energy prices that it gives you that ability to invest more in the future. And also, one of the reasons why divesting is not just a strategic point of view, not an ethical point of view, but strategic. These companies are giving back their equity. They've taken that opportunity with all the extra money that they've got to either give it back in dividends, to pay themselves, or to buy back their shares. And even that is a statement of intent of how they view their equity, and their equity holders. Because what they're saying is, their shareholders, either we can't make as much money from this as you can, so we're giving you back, or we're really just going to be doubling down more on fossil fuels. And so our decision process around that as a steward on behalf of the Church of England means that we have to be very disciplined. So no, yeah, Carl, we grapple with those things, but if you have the energy companies not following what their own industry body is telling them about what is necessary and what is possible, that will obviously make us have to think about the decisions that we've taken.
Thanks. I think we have got time for 2 more questions of their concise. So Penny Allen, please, and Mary Derlacher. Thank you.
Penny Allen, Lichfield 335. It's great. Okay, thank you. A question really about the way in which we're handling our own problems at home. I was delighted to see we've got permission for net zero homes, and as we know, many of the homes in our country are substandard in terms of heat and using energy. We've also got concerns with our government about the international aid budget, which we know is going to divert money from necessary climate change initiatives if we're not careful. Are there any conversations that are taking place politically that will be helpful to climate change in general around the world and specifically in our country? And is there any change in our investment process that would assist those of us all of us really, except for recent developments in my own community, which has had 200 new homes with heat pumps and just electricity? Is there any pressure that we can put or set an example to our governments in the work that you're doing? Thank you.
Mary Derlacher, Chelmsford 271. Thank you, Chair. I think looking at this document, it's full of that buzzword, complexity, which seems to be a feature of our group of sessions so far. So I want to go back to a plea. Can we make the main thing the main thing? As the Church of England, we have a duty to be witnesses to the gospel of the good news of Jesus Christ. There's no mention of God in this document, and there's no mention of Jesus. So thinking of that wonderful Christmas message from Apollo 8, as they looked from a barren space to this orb, this wonderful world, and he read out, Anders read out, in the beginning, God. So please, can we put him back in the center? Without him, we're lost. We need him. Can we have prayer and reference to him? Thank you.
Thanks. We do have to finish at 1:45, so I'll ask for a response.
Yeah. I'll take the first one and Clive will take the second. On that aspect of net zero homes, it's one of the key things even within how our commissioners deal with our properties, and as we, on our strategic land portfolio, how we do our developments, is something which is very much at the forefront. Because we are very conscious and sensitive to the way in which the transition to net zero can lead to inequity to those who are already most vulnerable, inequitable outcomes to those who are already most vulnerable. One thing which we've been reflecting on, this whole idea of green lining. So in the past, we used to hear of red lining, where particular communities in societies were kept out of getting credit or finance because of their particular circumstances. You can see that beginning to happen, this whole idea of, because of somebody's house not being energy efficient or in the wrong place, and invariably those are some of the most vulnerable, them being left out of some of the essentials of things which give human dignity. So that's one that we're looking at on that front. On the other front, in terms of more internationally, we are a member of a body called the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. Olga, our head of responsible investing, has been engaged in that. And one particular global initiative which has come out recently is the Bridgetown Initiative, which is looking at how more finance globally can be set up towards getting private and public sector finance going to emerging market countries for climate finance. And that is one where we, behind the scenes, are engaged quite actively and increasingly in front of it. And finally, one really important aspect, and it was even reflected in our real assets update, everyone is focusing on the transition dimensions of climate change, but the resilience dimension is very important. So if you think climate change has the transition aspect, but what is actually happening physically with the climate, that actually is going to hit us a lot more before 2050. And we're increasingly thinking about how we focus on climate resilience in our discussions, in our work, because because actually making economies, societies resilient will actually be ensuring that we're targeting the most vulnerable right away. Thanks.
Clive, I think you've got 60 seconds.
Thank you, Mary. All of our work is underpinned by theological work through the Ethical Investment Advisory Group and through the various other institutions of the Church. We are very clear who we are, and our Lord Jesus Christ is our inspiration. I will take away your challenge that we make that explicit in text that we issue. As you say it, I felt a kind of pierce in my heart, because that's not who I am. But it is slightly complicated in a world where so many people now have turned away from faith. But your challenge is a wonderful way to end this conversation, and thank you.
Thank you. That concludes this item of business.
Good morning, Synod. We come to item 9, questions, part 2. I'm not going to go through my whole preamble again, but I will just mention when you ask your supplementary that it is just one question and not 2 or 3. That would be helpful. Thank you. So we are starting at question 60, and we're taking questions 60 to 141 for the House of Bishops together. Question 60. Yeah.
Chantal Noppen, Durham 108. In some other parts of the Anglican Communion, the distinction between marriage and civil partnership doesn't exist, so neither partnership formalisation has more validity than the other. Sorry. In these parts of the Anglican Communion, they often have quite a high doctrine of marriage, so they expect their clergy to be married when they desire to live with their partner, which gives a kind of problematic consequence for a clergy person through obedience to local expectation, being caught in this catch-22 situation where divorce or separation becomes considered necessary to move between and across the Anglican Communion and subsequently diocese, I guess. How are the House of Bishops planning to deal with that in line of the developments we're working towards here?
I think probably my answer at the moment is that we have considered the nature of marriage not just in the Anglican Communion, but also, for example, the nature of marriage and civil marriage here, but also across Europe, because you rightly point out there are different views. So we have considered it.
Yes, go ahead.
Ian Paul Sutherland, Nottingham 229. Bishop, when you say that it's essential that every bishop have their own freedom of conscience, is the understanding that the freedom of conscience trumps the need to uphold the doctrine of the Church, or does the commitment to the doctrine of the Church constrain the exercise of freedom of conscience?
I think, so I don't think conscience trumps doctrine, but there is a connection there. I also think there's an issue around individual conscience and corporate conscience as well. And I think what you raise is a point of where, in fact, there is a conversation going on between it. So that's not a clear answer to you, I know, but I think there is further work to do on both, is what I'm saying, and we recognise that.
Question 61. Supplementary. Yes, May Christie.
May Christie, Southwark 222. Will the new pastoral guidance be a required tick box, I think that's the British phrase, tick box on the paperwork and the online portal for the shared discernment process as the issues in human sexuality currently is? Or will that cease when issues is replaced, and instead will the pastoral guidance exist as a discussion document?
Great multi-choice answer there, question there. I think probably I'm not going to, neither are what it's going to look like. So the new pastoral guidance won't look like issues, which of course issues was formulated for one reason, it's been used for another. So in fact the pastoral guidance is likely, and that's a bit of the work we're doing at the moment, what does that look like? But it's likely to be a whole series of different things that will relate to the prayers of love and faith, but also relate to the procedure for discernment. Some may relate to, so there's a whole series of things. So it won't ever quite look like issues and a tick box, but there will be a number of things that will feed into a discernment process, as there will be into the use of the prayers of love and faith.
Supplementary. Yes, go ahead.
Sam Margrave, Coventry 295. Thank you for your answer, Bishop. In relation, while issues was a document, will ordinands or those exploring vocation still be required to order their lives in accordance with the canons and to witness the canons of the Church of England in the lives that they lead?
Yes.
Thank you. Question 62. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for Matt Beer, Lichfield 143. Thank you for your answer, Bishop Sarah. Will the BCP and the ordinal continue to be the standard in which our lives will be ordered?
Yes.
Question 63.
Yes, Ian Paul.
John,
John, sorry.
395 St Albans. Thank you for the answer. Please, may you provide details, such as when it was agreed, was there a vote, what theological work was done ahead of making a decision for the agreement and the long-standing policy referred to in your answer?
I'm sure somebody can provide that to you.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Jane.
Ozanne Oxford 380. Perhaps this will help, Mr. John. I'm wondering if the Bishop is aware of the Synod's overwhelming support for the Diocese of Blackburn's motion to welcome transgender people back in July 2017, during which an amendment to consider theological, pastoral and other issues around gender transition was rejected firmly by all three houses. So could I suggest that it might be useful for us to more fully understand a range of matters to do with gender identity, including non-binary people, and perhaps also for us to better understand intersex? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I do like it when our questions build on each other rather than stand alone, so thank you for that. Living in love and faith was not just about same-sex marriage, and it is one of my, I suppose one of my great sorrows is that's where we've ended up a lot of our time on. Because, of course, it did deal with a lot of wider issues related to human identity and sexuality, as well as, you know, what makes a good marriage, you know, relationships. And so I do think there is more work for us to do, as you say. I suppose that, so what I fear, my sort of, in answering it is I just don't know where the resources for time and people will come from. I just don't know. You know, we're struggling, you know, sometimes we struggle to do what we're needing to do at the moment. So I do think you are right that there is the requirement for future work. And I do think that the Church should be part of that. I'm very grateful for the work of the Household and Family Commission and for their report, Love Matters, because that, in some sense, does take some of the things that Living in Love and Faith tried to look at, and did, in fact, look at, but we've dropped along the way because of where our focus has ended up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Question 64. Yes, go ahead.
Ian Paul, 229, Southall and Nottingham. Bishop Sarah, thank you very much for your extremely clear and helpful answer that the people in a marriage continue to be the same people. I wonder if you could tell me where members of Synod can access the documentation around the discussion in the Pastoral Advisory Group and the reason for coming to this conclusion, and if it's not available, when might it be published?
Ian, I will look into that. I generally don't know whether that is available. That's not how the Pastoral Advisory Group worked, I don't think. But I will see what I can find out for you.
Thank you very much.
Supplementary.
Yes, go ahead.
May Christie, Southwark 222. Thank you so much, Bishop Sarah, for the answer to that question. Is it the policy of the Church of England that parish priests should ask invasive questions regarding the gender identity of couples purporting to get married?
I think maybe what you know is that as clergy, when a couple comes to us to get married, we have pastoral conversations. And I expect, because I know, that parish priests are very good at that. And so in a sense, I rely on the parish priests to do what they do well. And within any marriage preparation, there are pastoral conversations in the preparation for marriage.
Question 65. 66.
Oh, sorry, I did say supplementary.
Okay, go ahead, sorry. Question 65.
Thank you. I noticed that while the question concerns the doctrine... Sorry, Ros Clark, Lichfield 336. I noticed that while the question concerns the doctrine of the Church of England, the answer refers to its teaching. Can we now take it that the teaching of the Church of England is indeed recognised to be its doctrine?
I think what Rosie raised is a really interesting question. So some of the work that the Faith and Order Commission are doing on our behalf, and I'll make a reference to that this afternoon, is in fact that conversation around, where the conversation between doctrine and teaching, and in a sense how they develop and change. So I think there's a conversation to have. And one of my reflections often is that in this area we often... some people here will feel that sexuality is a salvation issue. And one of my things is, have we therefore changed the Church of England's doctrine around marriage, because actually it probably wasn't historically a salvation issue. So I think there's a very interesting conversation around teaching and doctrine, and the Faith and Order Commission are helping with that at the moment, and I think you're absolutely right, related to where we are at the moment around the issues coming, or the response from Living in Love and Faith, that we need that conversation, and that's being provided.
Question 66.
Supplementary.
Yes.
Ros Clark Litchfield 336. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to have this confirmation, Bishop Sarah. Can you also confirm that the Church's doctrine on sexual immorality and sex outside marriage remains unchanged?
I
That
think
wasn't meant to be a trick question.
Oh, was it not?
Not really.
My reflections on it, if I give you my reflections on it. So I think that some of the conversations that we have begun to have in the College and House, and I'm sure it goes around, is around the nature of sexual intimacy, which clearly is linked to immorality. And of course, you know, some of us over the last few weeks have been reading Nehemiah and Joshua and other bits of the Old Testament, where actually we could sit there and think, oh my goodness, that's sexual immorality, isn't it? And I think so I think there is a conversation about that, and where does that then sit with our teaching and doctrine? Has really our teaching, our doctrine, gone into some of those details that really we haven't gone into, because actually even since 2017, some of our understanding about some of these things is different. So I'm not going to give you a straight answer, but I do think it is something that requires a better conversation than standing in a Q&A in the middle of this wonderful group of people.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for this answer. Can you give the Synod any help in resolving this clear statement with what appear to be very clearly contradictory statements made by the Archbishop of York immediately after the February session of Synod, and again a contradictory statement made by the Archbishop of Canterbury in the last 2 weeks?
I don't think that's a question for me.
Question 67. Yes, go ahead, James.
Bishop Sarah, I'm a little bit confused. I thought that the purpose of LLF was for us to understand that we had differing understandings on marriage, on relationships, and the whole purpose of LLF, which you encouraged the whole of Synod and the whole of the Church of England to engage with, was to enable that conversations. And indeed, at the Lambeth Conference, the call actually firmly stated that there were a plurality of views held in all theological understanding. Would you agree with me that some of these questions are trying to make you dance on a pinhead that negates a lot of our LLF process, and that we should be encouraging discussions, not closing them down?
So I think I won't make a comment on the questions, because I don't think that's my place. It may be a matter of opinion. But what I think the whole purpose of LLF has been recognising the fact that there is difference. There's difference within the church, our own church communities, and within the House of Bishops. But I think there's a brilliant bit of investigative journalism done by the Church Times this week. How did they spot that we were different? But anyway, and in a sense, what I think our discernment as a synod is to discern how do we move forward? What is our response? Recognising uncertainty and difference. That it's not about bringing around a consensus, but it is about trying to find that space in which we can occupy, recognising our difference. And if there continues, which there will be, the nature of difference and uncertainty is that we need to be people open to listening to the other. Spirit. And I will learn as much from you as I hope you'd learn from me.
Thank you. Thanks.
Question 68. Yes. It was you first. Thank you.
Andrew Bell, Oxford 374. Thank you, Bishop Sarah, for your answer, in which you refer to requesting extra work being done. I guess I may be anticipating something that we'll hear about this afternoon, but just in case. When will we hear the outcome of the additional work that's being requested, and of the workings behind those outcomes? Despite the volume of work needed, will this be in good time for consideration and discernment before November Synod?
Yeah, so the work, the timeline, which isn't completely clear, because with any discernment often it slightly varies, is that our intention is to bring to the November Synod both the workings as well as the proposals for implementation of the motion that was agreed at Synod in February. So that is our proposal.
Question 69.
Brenda Wallace, Chelmsford 85. I wonder what consideration has been given to the pastoral support that will be needed for clergy whose marriages are living in enforced celibacy, or those whose licenses have been removed, should these situations not be regularised in the near future? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think what you raise is a really important question, that the issues that we're talking about, the questions that are being raised, all of them have pastoral implications for many of us here. And I think one of the things that I, with or without living in love and faith, that we as a church should be investing is in our pastoral care for our clergy and for their relationships. I don't think we do enough of that. And some of us will see the consequence of that. So there is something for me about investment in our pastoral support for our clergy, in their relationships and in their households, that I do think we have to work harder at.
Thank you very much, Bishop.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Robin Hall, Europe 307. In February, Bishop Sarah, I asked you whether the apology offered to victims of church homophobia would mean an individual apology and compensation where appropriate to those clergy who lost their home or income as a consequence of marrying their same-sex partner. You undertook to come back to me with a full response, which I've not yet had, and I wonder if you'd be able to answer that now, or could come back to me fully soon.
So I apologise that that hasn't come back to you yet. I will follow that up.
Thank you.
Question 70. Yes, go ahead.
Lindsay Llewellyn-Macduff, Rochester 201. Thank you for your answer, but it created some curiosity in me, Bishop. How is this distinct from civil marriage? The following questions, just to emphasise, are rhetorical rather than additional questions. But is it not a gift of God in creation? And is it not a sign of loyalty and unity that all should honour? And are we suggesting that civil marriage is a light undertaking?
Thank you, and I'm glad that you've got a curiosity, because I do think that what we need at the moment is a curiosity, and so I'm grateful that you expressed that curiosity. And of course the Civil Marriage Act in 2013, was it 2014, it raised questions that hadn't been raised before, and I think you, therefore that's one of the pieces of work that we are doing, is whether that nature of holy matrimony and civil marriage, how that influences what we're doing around living in love and faith. But I would never pretend to think that anybody goes into any sort of commitment like civil marriage lightly or carelessly, but with profound thought.
Question 71. Yes.
Stephen Hoffmeyer, Guildford 320. Thank you, Bishop Sarah, for preparing an answer to my question. If I were in my day job, I would be simply saying to the witness, could you please answer the question? But I can't do that in these circumstances.
I'm glad I'm not a witness, but your sister in Christ.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My question is this. Is it the teaching of the Church of England that sexual activity should be within permanent, stable and faithful relationships of marriage, as that is understood in Canon C30 and the Book of Common Prayer?
That is the teaching of the Church of England, and I think that what we're doing around living in love and faith is, in a sense, is understanding that that we are being required to provide a pastoral response in a different world, in the same way as historically around the change of remarriage of divorced people. That we provided a pastoral response, and therefore there is something about us having to reflect here and also wider around what that response is. And therefore what you raise is a really important question, and one of the reasons why we don't come back in July with a full set of this is our implementation of living in love and faith is recognising some of the complexities in which we are ministering, and in which we are caring, and in which we are shining and making the love of God known in Jesus Christ.
Thank you very much.
Question 72? Yes.
Roseanne, Oxford 380. Given that sexual intimacy has, as we've seen in many of these questions, between two people of the same sex, Given that sexual intimacy between two people of the same sex goes to the root of all our differences, as we've seen in these questions, and that my personal desire for sexual intimacy with a woman bans me from being ordained or married in the Church of England, can I suggest that it's critical that we clearly define what we're disagreeing about, particularly if with women we're talking about penetrative sex or not, so that we can ensure that we're disagreeing about the same thing. And can I ask whether we could do some research about whether we understand sexual intimacy in the same way within the Church of England and indeed across the Anglican Communion?
Thank you, Jane. I suppose the question I'd raise is whether, it'd be interesting to know whether research has been done. Michael King, who sadly died, in the early work, whenever it was 2017, Michael King that was some of his exact points of recognising that as a church, we don't talk about sex very often. I have to say, it has been. It hasn't always been easy in the House of Bishops or the College of Bishops to talk about sex, and it wasn't minuted how we did it.
Well, God created it.
Now I'm blushing. Sorry. How we spoke about it. But I do... sorry, that was not a distraction.
It will be memorable.
So I do agree with you that it is at the heart of some of our difficulties. However, I'm not sure in Synod we have the environment or the way in which we talk about it, or even provide papers to talk about it in that way. And therefore, one of the challenges around moving forward with living in love and faith is understanding what is at the root of our difference. And how do we together, because in this room there will be people who will have read scripture, studied it and come up differently, and who have different views on exactly the question that you've raised to me. And so I go back to the fact that actually what are we seeking to discern? We're seeking to discern a way forward when there is a difference in this house and Synod, and there is a difference there is uncertainty. So therefore there has to be a question. How much time do we spend, and what is a distraction and what is not? And I think that's one of the things around the next stages of living in love and faith, and saying what are the real things we need to have spent time on to come back in November to implement what the agreement of the motion was in February. My belief is that the question you raised will not go away
It's the core
from this
question.
church or synod, but we need to say, what do we need to do to come back in November? And that's, in a sense, our task.
Thank you.
Question 73. Yes, go ahead.
Matt Beer, Lichfield 143, thank you for your answer to Joy Maudley's question. How many ordinands withdrew from ordinations this Petertide in light of February's LLF vote?
I don't have that figure.
Yes, Clive Scow.
Go at London 358. If I thought I was going to ask a supplementary, I wouldn't have been sitting up there. But anyhow,
Keeps you fit, Clive.
takes more than that, Bishop. Is the House of Bishops aware that many members of Synod know of people who had been sensing a call to ordination who are no longer pursuing it in the Church of England, although they may do in other churches? Are they aware of people that there are people known to members of this Synod who have not felt able, having been ordained deacon, to go on to be ordained priest this year? And if they're not aware of that, then will they take steps to find out?
So yes, Clive, both in the college and the house, we've had that conversation, and therefore there are some dioceses where it's not an issue, where, as you'll know, there are some dioceses that are, and we have made that, that conversation has happened in both the house and the college.
Thank you.
Question 74. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the answer. Ian Paul, 229 Sutherland, Nottingham.
Excuse me, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Hello.
Thank you, Ian. Sandy Turner, Chelmsford, 275. Thank you, Bishop, for your answer. Could I ask what measures are being considered which will allow the, quote, generous theological, ecclesial and pastoral space to be provided in a way that is not incompatible or incongruent with the ordinal and ordination vows?
So that's exactly the work that's been undertaken at the moment. What I can't do is detail them. One of the things we've spoken about at the House and the College of Bishops is in a sense that there is such a link between so many of the different parts that in fact that some of these parts are moving all the time. But we absolutely hear your point, and that's some of the work that we've talked about, some of the work that's ongoing that will, in a sense, come back in November.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Ian Paul, 229 Sutherland, Nottingham. I wonder if the Bishop could clarify whether or not there has been any theological work yet done on the question of whether or not the doctrine of marriage might be considered, quote, a thing indifferent or not.
So what was the last bit of your...
Has any theological work been done on this question?
Oh, a thing indifferent.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is some work going on that, but it hasn't been included.
No,
Thank you. Question 75? Question 76? Yes.
Sorry, Daniel Matavu, Oxford 379. I regret that the answer you've given to my question doesn't seem to answer the question, but I want to build on what you responded to Mr. Hofmeyr in relation to question 71, that sexual activity should be within a permanent relationship, as in understood in canon. I think it should be B30, shouldn't it?
Your supplementary should be relevant to the question.
Yes, I haven't come. I'm explaining my supplementary in the light of the answer the Bishop's given to question 71. So the question 71 is about the teaching. My question was originally about the doctrine of marriage, and it was in that context. And my supplementary question is simply this: will you assure this chamber that the bishops will not seek to resolve from the assertion that you made in November 22 in relation to doctrine that holy matrimony is the proper context for sexual intimacy, and that would remain part of the doctrine and teaching of the Church?
So I think what I can assure you is that there has been, so there is a piece of work, the conversation we're doing is around teaching and doctrine and where they are the same or different. And I think that what I said in a previous answer is that we're not seeking to change the doctrine of marriage. That's really clear. That was the motion, was affirmed in it. But what we're trying to do is to respond to pastoral care for people. So that's the sort of work that we're doing at the moment, and that's the response that will come back in November. And in terms of reassuring the chamber, well, what I'd say to the people that are in this room is that it is a complexity, and I think the questions will demonstrate that complexity, which is why we haven't been able to bring something back in July.
Thank you. Question 77? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Chantal Moppin, Durham 108. Given that we've already heard there's concern around the number of people not getting ordained because of February's vote on LLF, could we acknowledge that lots of candidates have stepped back, willingly or not, from the discernment process through the years due to the use of issues in human sexuality, and they have been unseen and unheard due to the damage and pain that has caused them? Can we acknowledge that with regret and concern?
I'm very happy to... I'm very happy to acknowledge the hurt that the Church has caused LGBTQI people.
Supplementary, and it was my question. May Christie, Southwark 222. Thank you so much, Bishop Sarah, and thank you for that really important statement. Can we have assurances from the House of Bishops that the new pastoral guidance will not use some of the worst language from issues in human sexuality, such as referring to gay people as homophiles and saying that bisexual people are by nature promiscuous?
Thank you, May. You raise a really important point, that we all have to watch our language, and what I will make a commitment to is that we will do our best to make sure that we sense check right across the range of traditions and a range of people, that we have a sense check that what we don't do is use language in a way that is offensive to people.
We've already had 2 supplementaries, I'm sorry. Question 78. Question 79.
Sandy Turner, Chelmsford, 275. Thank you very much for the answer to my question about covenanted friendships. Could I ask what measures will be put in place to ensure that the individuals understand their covenant to be, and I quote, as binding as the individuals making it, in order to avoid misinterpretation, disappointment, or distress when such a covenanted friendship breaks down?
Thank you very much for the supplementary question. I think it's really important that understanding of covenanted friendship is made clear. That will no doubt, or may, I should say not no doubt, may feature in the pastoral guidance. It may also feature in some of the notes which will be supplied to the prayers of love and faith when they appear in final form. And it will, of course, as the Bishop of London has said before, we do trust our clergy and other ministers who will be meeting for pastoral conversations with couples to make those points clear.
Yes, Prudence Daly.
Prudence Daly, 376 Oxford. Forgive me if I've missed something somewhere, but has any consideration been given as to whether married people can enter into covenanted friendships, either with other married people or with single people, or whether only single people can enter into them?
I don't think that consideration has been given to that, and no doubt that's a point that the Pastoral Guidance Group will want to take on board.
Question 80. Yes, Luke Appleton.
Luke Appleton 309. Thank you, my friend, very much for your answer. I was perhaps asked the question a little bit prematurely, I guess. So are there plans explicitly to review the approach to passing resolutions after the prayers of love and faith matter has been settled to ensure ecclesiastical consistency?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I understand the desire to get clarity on this issue, but this will depend not only on the final forms of the prayers of love and faith, which are being refined, but on the route of by which they are approved for use in churches or by ministers. And as you know, when they first came to General Synod in draft form in February, the proposal was of commendation for ministers to use at their discretion. Part of the continuing conversation in the LLF process amongst the House of Bishops since then has been whether there might be canonical routes to authorisation. And the answer to your question really will depend on what the outcome of that is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question 81 and 82 together. Question 81? Yes, go ahead.
82. Martin Poole, Chichester 97. Thank you for your answer to my question 82. Given the current draft status of the prayers of love and faith and the uncertainty of the timetable to approval or commendation or whatever it is we're going to do, what would happen if someone used some or all of this resource in the intervening time?
I'm afraid that is a legal question.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Simon Butler.
Try again. Given that Canon B53 allows discretion to incumbents to conduct worship for which no provision is made, subject to being consonant with the doctrine of the Church of England, and given that the House of Bishops has declared that the draft prayers do not contradict the doctrine of the Church of England, what advice can the House give to clergy who wish to use those rights now?
Thank you. I think that is a very good question. The response which I know that many bishops individually, diocesan bishops individually, have given to their clergy or other ministers is to ask them not to use the prayers of love and faith in their draft form at present, while the process of refinement and the wider discussions around their approval continue through this synodical process. And I think probably that is a very sensible position to adopt.
Yes, go ahead.
Bishop, given that the prayers were presented in draft form and have not returned to us with any revisions, and given that the process has not been resolved, is it not the case that the formal position is that it has not yet been resolved, that these prayers as presented are not indicative of a change in the doctrine of the Church of England? Sorry, there was three negatives
There's
there.
a lot of negatives in that. I'm trying to...
The legal position,
the
legal status of the prayers that were presented in February has not yet in fact been resolved. Is that not the case?
There is advice that they, from the Chief Legal Officer, that they are not contrary to the Church of England's doctrine of marriage, but the process of discussion continues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question 83. Question 84. Question 85. Question 86. Question 87. Question 88. Yes, go ahead. Yes, Rebecca Calvin, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca Calvin, Ely 304. Thank you for your thoughtful response about the three-legged stool with its legs of scripture, tradition and reason. Given, as you say, scripture is the primary source of ecclesial authority, and that treating scripture as primary, read in dialogue with tradition and reason, characterises Anglican thinking, why then, when it comes to the prayers of love and faith, have the bishops not provided a clear, agreed, theological basis for their proposals, but have instead effectively sawn off this leg of the stool?
Thank you. I don't want to pursue the metaphor of the stool too far, but it is the case that theological reflection is continuing. The Bishop of London mentioned the involvement of the Faith and Order Commission, which is part of that, and when the prayers of love and faith reappear in the final form, if we hope they do, in November, no doubt there will be some theological augmentation in the pastoral guidance, in the pastoral reassurance group, and in the notes and introduction to the prayers themselves.
Thank you.
Simon Eyre, Chichester 287. In the last paragraph of your answer, you say prayers of love and faith like all Anglican liturgy. Can you confirm that the prayers of love and faith are liturgy? Because I'm confused about this. And if so, would they be subject to liturgical business? Thank you.
I think I need to apologise for rather loose language there. They are not designated as liturgy. Thank you.
Question 89. Questions 90 and 91 are taken together.
Simon Eyre,
90.
Simon Eyre,
Question
Chichester
91. Simon.
90, this is. Simon Eyre, Chichester 287. Luke 14 reminds us of the importance of counting the cost before undertaking any major enterprise. So in view of the reaction to the prayers from within the Church of England and the wider Anglican community already, would the House of Bishops consider such a risk assessment an urgent priority at this time? Thank you.
So I think that it would be wrong to say that we have not counted the cost. So part of the Living in Love and Faith from 2017 was recognising the cost to individual people. And in terms of the work that we have done since then, we have spoken and recognised the costs, not just to LGBTQI people, but also the cost that the motion that went to Synod and was accepted by Synod, amended, has caused to people within Synod, within the wider Anglican communion, within our diocese. So we very much are aware of that cost. And therefore that's, in terms of our response, both in terms of listening and also taking that listening into what we're doing, we're absolutely serious about that. I have to say, I do not think that the House of Bishops is necessarily constructed to do the formal type of risk assessment that you have spoken about. I suspect that belongs to the trustees more than it does the House of Bishops.
Yes, go ahead.
Given that the LLF supplementary document, which is cited and linked to here, specifically enjoins the House of Bishops to actually undertake that kind of risk assessment, I wonder if the Bishop could help us understand on what grounds it was decided to reject that specific commendation.
Sorry, can you repeat your question, Ian?
Yes, in the question 91 that Zoe Hammers asked, there's a link there to the LLF paper in which Leslie Francis and another author specifically recommend, as a matter of urgency, that a formal impact assessment is done before any change is introduced as part of the discussions. That was part of the LLF process. Is it possible for you to explain on what grounds the House of Bishops has decided not to follow that explicit recommendation of the LLF process?
I think it goes back to my answer that we understand that the Archbishop's Council is.
Thank you. Question 92. Question 93. Question 94.
Sorry, 92.
Question 92, supplementary. Go
Rebecca
ahead.
Hunt, Portsmouth 386. I am from Portsmouth, not Truro, contrary to what it's...
Same sort of coastline.
Thank you very much for your answer. Can I ask, since you prepared the answer, has external counsel been engaged by you or the Archbishops on this question? And if so, please could you share the legal advice that you've been given?
So we haven't engaged external counsel. As part of the work of Living in Love and Faith, we've talked a lot about the theological resources and the work with FAOC. We obviously receive legal advice. And I said in February, and I've reiterated, I think, today, that we have to, when we come to November, show our working. So that working will show both the theological working as well as the legal working.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
So this is the 93, but I think
Yes,
they were
that's
taken
fine.
together.
Question 93.
Bishop, I just wanted to ask you specifically about Canon B2 and whether the House of Bishops has sought or received legal advice in relation to Canon B2 and whether they've shared it with the other bishops and when.
So in the House and in the College of Bishop, we have spoken about Canon B2, Canon B4.2, Canon B5. I suspect there may be others that I'm missing from my list. So we have discussed those. There has been legal advice and some theological reflection. And when but as we have yet to make a decision about how the prayers will be implemented, but we will make that very clear in terms of that legal advice when we come in November. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Hoffman, Guildford 320. In a supplementary to the answer to question 93, thank you, Bishop Sarah. You state that the external counsel have not been instructed, and you've confirmed again that not even in recent days is that the case by you or the archbishops. You say the legal advice has been comprised in a number of email exchanges as well as comments on policy documents. Can those please be provided to General Synod in the interests of transparency?
What we will do is we will provide the clarity when we come to November of the legal advice that we are using for the way in which we're going to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question 94? Yes.
Sue Cavill, Derby 297. Thank you for your answer to my question. Following up on that question, on the answer you've given, given that the Church of England's direction of travel is towards greater numbers of lay leaders, in some cases outnumbering ordained leaders, when will the model for groups working on issues such as LLF change so that lay people are seen as having equal voices with the clergy?
Yeah, Sue, I think your point is well made, and you know, we can look back in reflection and think, oh gosh, you know, I think your point is well made. We are in the coming months going to set up a process of consulting with stakeholders, and in that we will make sure that that we get that balance right. But thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Question 95. Yes, go ahead.
Simon Edge, 287. It's really building on that last answer, really. I think there are only 4 of 38 members of the implementation group who were lay members. So in view of the fact that these are live discussions, what's planned to be done about the current discussions and involving the lay voice more clearly? Thank you.
Yeah, so as I said, that what we're doing is, this afternoon I'll talk about how we're sort of moving to very specific pieces of work. And in some of those, we will continue to use the members that we have of the reference group, but we will also do stakeholder engagement to, in a sense, correct the balance that we haven't got.
Thank you. Question 96? Yes, go ahead.
Ian Paul, 229 Sutherland, Nottingham. Bishop Sarah, thank you for your answer to the question, but I think you've only answered one part of the 3 parts there, which is, do you make any mention of when this decision was communicated to the House of Bishops, the Archbishop's Council, and perhaps even members of General Synod?
I can't, I'm going to cough. I can't remember the dates, actually, but I'm very happy to give it. But it was literally college, house, members of the working group. An email went out, and then it was made public. So but it was pretty close. It was a pretty close span. But I'm very happy to get the precise dates to you.
That would be very useful. Thank you very much.
Question 97. Question 98. Question 9. Yes.
Supplementary question 98.
Richard Deno, Liverpool 348. Thank you, Bishop Sarah, for your reply. May I address you as a sister in Christ?
You may.
Bless you. Bishop Sarah, thank you for pointing out that we've been in a process of careful listening and discernment among the people of God, and I, for one, am thankful for that process. We have paid attention to Scripture and the historic teachings of the Church, as you say, and we've recognised a range of interpretations and understandings of Scripture, as you say. But in recognising that range, we've also recognised that those interpretations are not within the doctrine of the Church. Therefore, my question is, the language of false teaching and sexual immorality, which does not sit well with the word you used, uncertainty, in one of your earlier answers. How are we to reintroduce those words to be faithful to the word of God as we have received? Thank you.
You know, I think we have to be very careful with our language. You know, I am somebody who is regularly called a false teacher on social media. I'm not sure where that evidence is to call me a false teacher. I don't think they often would. I mean, some of them do it to my face, actually, I have to say. And I know the consequence on me personally of that. So I think we have to be really careful about our language. And therefore, I do not believe that I am a false teacher. I take very seriously my ordination vows. I study the Scriptures deeply. I may get it wrong sometimes, you know, and I recognise my vulnerability in that. So my view is actually we have to think really carefully about our language. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we do not seek to understand Scripture and to teach it as we have received it, and to discern the work of the Holy Spirit in our midst, and to reflect the light and love of Christ to the world. So my answer is, let's think really carefully about the words we use and the impact they have on people.
And Bishop Sarah, if I may also ask, how then
No,
those
sorry,
words...
you only get one question. Thank you. Question 99. Yes, go ahead.
Julie Maxwell, Winchester 429. I'm a paediatrician, and I would just like to ask for some clarification of what you understand by the term intersex in your answer to this question. In the medical profession, we currently use the term differences of sexual development rather than intersex, and this encompasses a wide variation, some of which are just minor anatomical differences, but others, such as congenital adrenal hyperplasia, can cause serious and even life-threatening health issues. So I'd just like some clarification on your understanding.
So what's your terminology used, differences?
Differences of sexual development. If you look on the NHS website, you'll see that.
I think we mean the same, and I think I will take from you, I think we mean the same, and I'd love to pick that conversation up with you so that we can learn about the language that we should be using.
I think the point is, therefore, some of these are serious medical conditions.
They are, absolutely.
Which your answer doesn't quite fit with that. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that, although I do think you raised, so for example, this earlier week I was talking about, you know, what does the church teach about healing? And if you know, and I personally, you know, I think one day we will, you know, be without pain and whatever. But at the same time, Christ was resurrected and his body had wounds in it and it was transformed. So I still believe, even if there are complex medical conditions, those individuals that are made in the image of God.
Oh, absolutely.
But I do understand that range is really complex, and I'd love to have a conversation with you so we can learn from your experience.
Supplementary?
Yes.
Philip Baldwin, 351. I asked this question because a number of my intersex friends wanted me to ask it, and they were really pleased with the response that you gave, because a number of them have been subject throughout their lives to unwanted medical interventions from medical practitioners. And it seems to be the case that for many intersex people, too often their lives have really been marred by unwanted surgeries.
Could you ask your question?
So I just wanted to ask, can you reaffirm this and your support for the intersex community?
I can absolutely reaffirm it, and I do think, you know, one of the real hopes around living in love and faith that we get better at, in a sense, understanding life from other people's perspective and to be able to listen to them and their experience. And I think that there have been great improvements around how the NHS support people with those differences that they have. And I think that we need to reduce our lack of understanding so we are better able to understand what, as a church, what we're talking about. But I absolutely would affirm that they are made in the image of God.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question 100. Yes, Judith Mulby.
Judith Mulby, University's TEIs 452. Thank you, Bishop Sarah, for your answer. It's good to know that all the learning and insight from ICSA about the connection between sexuality and safeguarding is being taken on board. And of course, it's also numerous lessons learned reviews, as you know, making this point as well. But it sounds like it's going on parallel tracks in your answer. So I'm wondering how the work of the National Safeguarding Steering Group and the LLF group are going to talk to each other about it.
So we have up to now had conversations around when it comes to this point. So they have been ongoing conversations, and we will ensure that continues.
Yes, go ahead, Charlie Screen.
Charlie Screen, number 164. Bishop, thank you for your answer. I'm very glad to see that the pastoral guidance and pastoral assurance will be assessed from a safeguarding perspective. Are you able to tell us by whom and when we will see their assessment?
As I said before, the pastoral guidance isn't going to be something that comes off the shelf and says, here it is. It will be a series of things. So I think every time one of those pieces are there, then we'll ensure that it's assessed. It will be assessed by the National Safeguarding team, and it will be there. So it will be done almost in parallel with those each individual piece of guidance.
And we'll see their assessment?
Yeah, so will you see? I think it'd be interesting. I suspect the assessment isn't a sort of, it's not like a sort of impact assessment and they give a report. I would expect them to be working with the group to change them, to in a sense, make them safer if they're not safer. So I would expect that the documents, the guidance that comes through would have been seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 101? Yes, go ahead.
Ian Paul 229, Sutherland, Nottingham. Given that the Church of England understands itself to be part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and given that the Roman Catholic Church has actually done the theological work here in quite an explicit way about a question that we are ourselves addressing, on what grounds did the House of Bishops decide not to actually engage with this as part of the theological reflection?
So we have engaged with the Roman Catholic Church in dialogue. It is interesting that they also, so there's some of the they also recognise they're learning from us. So I think it's a learning. I suppose what we're saying, we didn't consider the specific document, but we have been in a dialogue and conversation, and they have received the work that we've done as well as talk to them.
Yes, Sam Margrave.
Thank you. Sam Margrave, Coventry 295. The question says that, I've lost the question now. I apologise. The question said that it was looking for an Anglican way forward. Can the Bishop confirm that as Anglicans we are both Catholic and Protestant?
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes our session of questions. Can I remind Synod members that I would just like to inform you that there will be a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Ministry Experience Scheme taking place in James Hall at lunchtime. Thank you very much, Synod. This concludes.